In the shadowed halls of Avalon Palace, where whispers carry more weight than proclamations and loyalty can be bought with a single phone call, Queen Consort Helena Ashford believed her greatest enemy lived across the ocean. She was wrong. The most dangerous threat to her crown had been sleeping 3 doors down from her bedroom for the past 18 months, recording her every private moment, cataloging her every weakness, and building a case that would either destroy the monarchy or crown a new queen. When the electronic surveillance equipment hidden in the palace's ancient walls began transmitting at exactly midnight each night, it set in motion a chain of events that would expose not just state secrets, but the devastating personal betrayals that cut deeper than any political scandal. Some secrets are worth killing for, others are worth dying to protect. And in the Game of Thrones, the person you trust most is often the one sharpening the blade behind your back. The autumn rain pelted against the diamond-paned windows of Avalon Palace as Queen Consort Helena Ashford sat in her private study, unaware that her world was about to shatter. At 52, Helena possessed the kind of timeless elegance that photographers loved and tabloids envied. Silver hair swept into an impeccable chignon, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that could charm foreign dignitaries or freeze courtiers mid-sentence. Tonight, however, that composure was about to be tested in ways she never imagined. The evening had begun routinely. Helena had just finished her weekly review of charitable foundation reports when her private secretary, Margaret Thornfield, knocked softly on the mahogany door. Margaret, a woman in her early 60s with graying auburn hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, had served the royal household for over 30 years. Her loyalty was unquestioned, her discretion absolute, and her intuition for palace intrigue unmatched. "Your Majesty," Margaret said, her voice carrying an unusual tremor, "I need to speak with you immediately. It's regarding the security audit Sir James ordered last month." Helena looked up from her papers, noting the tension in Margaret's shoulders, the way her hands clutched a manila folder against her chest like armor. "Come in, Margaret. Close the door behind you." Margaret approached the desk with measured steps, her sensible heels clicking against the Persian rug. She placed the folder on Helena's desk with the reverence one might show a loaded weapon. "Ma'am, what I'm about to show you, it changes everything we thought we knew about palace security." Helena opened the folder, expecting routine surveillance reports or staff background checks. Instead, she found herself staring at detailed technical specifications for electronic monitoring equipment, devices she'd never authorized, installations she'd never approved, surveillance that extended into the most private corners of her life. "Where did you find this?" Helena's voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the papers. "Sir James's security team discovered the equipment during routine maintenance in the East Wing. Ma'am, these devices have been recording for months. Audio, video, private communications, everything." Margaret's voice dropped barely above a whisper. "The transmission logs show the data has been sent to an external location every night at midnight." Helena felt the blood drain from her face as the implications crashed over her. Every private conversation with King Edward, every phone call to her children from her first marriage, every vulnerable moment when she thought she was alone, all of it potentially in enemy hands. "Who has access to these locations?" Helena asked. Though part of her already dreaded the answer, Margaret consulted her notes, her hands visibly trembling. The East Wing houses primarily senior staff quarters and administrative offices. "But ma'am, the devices were placed in areas that required intimate knowledge of your daily routines, your private spaces, your schedule." "Margaret, who specifically has that level of access?" The older woman took a shaky breath. "Your immediate staff, a few trusted advisors, and—" She paused as if the words themselves were dangerous. "Lady Vivian Carmichael." Helena's world tilted. Vivian Carmichael, her closest confidant for the past 5 years. The woman she'd personally recruited from the diplomatic corps to serve as her private advisor, Vivian, with her quick wit and encyclopedic knowledge of international affairs, had become more than an employee. She was the younger sister Helena had never had, the daughter she'd hoped to mentor. They shared morning tea, evening conversations about literature and politics, and secrets that Helena had never told anyone else. "Are you certain?" Helena's voice barely functioned. "Ma'am, the timing of the installations corresponds exactly with Lady Vivian's arrival at the palace. The devices are sophisticated, military-grade equipment that would require specialized training to install and operate." Lady Vivian's background in intelligence work during her diplomatic service. Helena raised a hand, stopping Margaret mid-sentence. The room seemed to spin as memories flooded back. Vivian's uncanny ability to anticipate Helena's needs, her subtle questions about state matters that seemed like casual conversation, Her friendship with several foreign dignitaries whose countries had suddenly gained unexpected leverage in recent trade negotiations. Has anyone else seen this information? Helena managed to ask. Only Sir James and myself, ma'am. He wanted me to present it to you directly. Helena stood and walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears. The gardens below, usually a source of comfort, now seemed ominous in the darkness. Every shadow could be hiding another betrayal. Every loyal servant could be harboring secrets. Where is Lady Vivian tonight? Helena asked without turning around. In her quarters, ma'am. She mentioned she had some correspondence to catch up on. Helena's laugh held no humor. Correspondence, of course. She turned back to Margaret, and the older woman was shocked to see tears threatening in her mistress's eyes. 30 years of service, Margaret. In all that time, had you ever seen anything like this? No, ma'am. The betrayal, the intimacy of it, it's unprecedented. Elena walked back to her desk and carefully closed the folder. This information stays between us until I decide how to proceed. Not a word to Sir James beyond acknowledging that you've briefed me. Not a word to anyone.
Of course, Mom.
But what will you do? Helena looked at the folder as if it contained her own death warrant. In many ways, it did. The woman she'd trusted with her deepest fears about her role in the monarchy, her insecurities about following in the footsteps of Edward's beloved first wife, her worries about her children's adjustment to royal life, Vivian knew it all. And if Vivian was indeed the source of the surveillance, then Helena's most private moments were now weapons in someone else's hands. I don't know yet, Helena admitted, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. As queen consort, she was expected to have answers, to project strength and certainty. But this betrayal cut deeper than political maneuvering or media criticism. This was personal in a way that made her question everything she thought she knew about judgment, trust, and the price of power. Margaret cleared her throat gently. Ma'am, there's one more thing. The transmission schedule. It's not random. The data transfers happen every night at precisely midnight, but only when Lady Vivienne is in residence. When she travels, the transmissions stop. Helena closed her eyes, feeling the last of her hope crumble. The evidence was damning, but it was also personal. Vivienne hadn't just betrayed the crown. She'd betrayed a friendship that Helena had cherished in a world where genuine relationships were rare and precious. Thank you, Margaret. You've shown tremendous courage bringing this to me. It's my duty, Mom. But more than that, it's because I care about you. You deserve better than this. After Margaret left, Helena remained alone in her study, the folder lying closed on her desk like Pandora's box after the damage was done. Outside, the storm intensified, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was an omen of worse weather to come. She thought about confronting Vivienne directly, demanding answers, giving her the chance to explain. But the intelligence officer in her, the part of her that had learned statecraft from some of the most cunning political minds of her generation, knew better. If Vivienne was capable of this level of deception, a direct confrontation would only give her time to destroy evidence and craft lies. Elena picked up her phone to call King Edward, then set it down again. Edward was dealing with the aftermath of the textile workers' strike and the ongoing tensions with Parliament. This news would devastate him, not just politically but personally. He'd been the one to suggest they bring Vivienne into their inner circle, charmed by her intelligence and apparent dedication to the crown. No, Helena realized, this was her problem to solve. She'd been naive, perhaps even foolish, but she wouldn't compound the error by dragging others down with her. She would handle this quietly, strategically, and with the cold calculation that the situation demanded. But first, she needed to know exactly how deep the betrayal went. She needed to understand who Vivienne was really working for, what information had been compromised, and whether there were other conspirators in the palace walls. Helena reached for her personal phone, the one that even her security detail didn't monitor, and dialed a number she hadn't called in over a decade. When the voice answered on the third ring, she took a deep breath and stepped into a world she'd hoped never to enter again. Marcus, it's Helena. I need your help, and I need it tonight. Marcus Vale had been her handler during her own brief stint in intelligence work before her marriage to Edward. If anyone could help her navigate this treacherous situation without destroying the monarchy in the process, it was him. Your Majesty, Marcus's voice carried the weight of old secrets and older loyalties. I was wondering when you'd call. The implication in his words sent a chill through Helena. You knew? I suspected. Helena, you need to know. You're not the only royal household dealing with this level of infiltration. There's something much bigger happening here, and Vivienne Carmichael is just the beginning. Helena sank into her chair, realizing that what she thought was a personal betrayal might actually be part of a coordinated attack on the monarchy itself. The game she was about to play would determine not just her own survival, but the fate of the crown she'd sworn to protect. As the clock struck 11, Helena made her decision. Tomorrow, she would begin her own midnight investigation, turning the tables on those who thought they could manipulate her from the shadows. But tonight, she would sit with her heartbreak and prepare herself for a battle that would test everything she thought she knew about power, loyalty, and the terrible price of trust. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching Helena's mood as she prepared for what would be either the most brilliant or most catastrophic performance of her life. She'd spent the sleepless night reviewing Marcus's intelligence briefings, learning that Vivian's betrayal was part of a sophisticated network targeting multiple European royal families. The goal, according to intercepted communications, was to destabilize traditional monarchies through carefully orchestrated scandals and leaked private information. Helena chose her outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that conveyed authority without aggression, pearls that spoke to tradition, and her grandmother's sapphire brooch for courage. She would need every advantage for the conversation ahead. At precisely 10 o'clock, she summoned Vivian to her private sitting room for what she described as a routine briefing on upcoming state functions. The room, with its cream silk wallpaper and antique furniture, had witnessed countless royal conversations over the decades. Today, it would host a different kind of history. Vivian arrived punctually, as always, carrying her leather portfolio and wearing her characteristic warm smile. At 38, she possessed the kind of polished beauty that opened doors and disarmed opponents. Glossy dark hair, intelligent green eyes, and a manner that could shift seamlessly from deferential to commanding depending on the audience. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Vivian said, settling into the chair opposite Helena's with practiced ease. "I have the preliminary guest list for the Christmas reception, and there are a few diplomatic considerations we should discuss." Helena smiled, marveling at Vivian's performance. If she hadn't seen the evidence herself, she never would have suspected the woman sitting across from her of anything more serious than overcaffeination. "Actually, Vivian, I wanted to discuss something else first. I've been thinking about security protocols, particularly regarding information management." A flicker of something, caution, fear, passed across Vivian's features so quickly Helena might have imagined it. "Of course, ma'am." "Is there a specific concern?" Helena poured tea from the delicate porcelain service, her movements deliberately slow and controlled. "I've been wondering about the balance between transparency and privacy in royal households. Do you think it's possible for someone to know us too well?" Vivian accepted her teacup with steady hands. "I'm not sure I follow, ma'am." "Well, consider how much access our staff has to our private lives. They know our schedules, our habits, our conversations. In the wrong hands, such intimate knowledge could be quite dangerous." "Certainly, ma'am. That's why background checks and security clearances are so thorough." Helena set down her cup with a gentle clink that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "And yet sometimes people slip through, don't they? Sometimes the person you trust most is the one who knows exactly how to betray you." Vivian's composure finally cracked, just slightly. Her smile became forced, her breathing shallow. "Ma'am, if there's been a security breach, perhaps we should involve Sir James." "Oh, but we have," Helen interrupted, her voice maintaining its conversational tone even as her eyes turned arctic. "Sir James conducted a very thorough audit. Would you like to know what he found?" The color drained from Vivian's face, but to her credit, she didn't immediately crumble. "I'm sure any findings would be handled through proper channels." Helena stood and walked to her desk, retrieving the manila folder that had shattered her world the night before. She placed it on the coffee table between them like a chess piece moving into checkmate position. "Proper channels." "Yes, let's talk about proper channels, Vivian. Because according to this report, someone has been using very improper channels to transmit private information from this palace every night at midnight." Vivian stared at the folder as if it might explode. Her hands, Helena noticed, had begun to tremble almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, I think there may be some misunderstanding." "The misunderstanding," Helena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "was mine. I misunderstood your loyalty, your friendship, and your integrity. But I understand perfectly now." The mask finally slipped completely. Vivian's shoulders sagged, and when she looked up at Helena, her green eyes held a mixture of defiance and something that might have been regret. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Vivian said, her carefully cultivated accent revealing hints of something harder, more Eastern European than the refined British tone she usually employed. "Then enlighten me." Helena sat back down, projecting calm even as her heart pounded. "Help me understand how the woman I trusted with my deepest fears, my private struggles, my family's vulnerabilities, could systematically betray that trust for what? Money? Ideology? Simple spite?" Vivian laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. You think this is personal? You think I spent 5 years of my life cultivating a friendship with you because I enjoy tea parties and gossip about garden designs? The words hit Helena like physical blows. Every shared moment, every intimate conversation, every time she'd felt grateful for Vivian's understanding and support, all of it had been a lie. Then what is it about? Helena demanded, abandoning her controlled facade. What could possibly be worth this level of deception? Vivian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where she and Helena had taken countless walks, discussing everything from international relations to Helena's adjustment to royal life. You sit in this palace surrounded by luxury and privilege, completely oblivious to the suffering your institution perpetuates. The wealth, the influence, the unearned power passed down through bloodlines, while millions struggle for basic necessities.
So this is about politics, Helena said, though she suspected there was more to the story. This is about justice, Vivian replied, turning back to face her.
And yes, before you ask, I believe in the cause I serve. But that doesn't mean I didn't struggle with what I had to do. What you had to do, Helena repeated slowly, including befriending a lonely woman who genuinely cared about you? For the first time since her mask had slipped, Vivian showed genuine emotion, a flash of pain that she quickly suppressed. You weren't supposed to be, I didn't expect you to be so, human, Helena supplied coldly. Vulnerable, Vivian finished quietly. The briefings described you as calculating, ambitious. Someone who'd married into royalty for power and position. They didn't mention that you cry when you read letters from children in hospitals, or that you still have nightmares about failing your stepchildren, or that you sometimes sit alone in your study at night wondering if you're worthy of the crown you wear. Helena felt exposed, as if Vivian had stripped away not just her secrets but her very skin. And yet you continued recording, continued transmitting, continued betraying someone you claimed triggered your conscience. Because I couldn't stop, Vivian's careful control finally shattered completely. Do you think this is some amateur operation you can just walk away from? Do you think I had a choice once I was in this deep? There's always a choice, Helena said, though even as she spoke, she wondered if that was true. Is there? Vivian laughed bitterly. They have my sister, Helena, my 15-year-old sister who thought she was going to study abroad in Prague. That was 3 years ago. And I haven't seen her since, except in photographs they send me whenever I hesitate to follow orders. The revelation hit Helena like a cold wave. Suddenly, Vivian's betrayal took on a different dimension, still inexcusable but tragically understandable. Why didn't you tell me? We could have helped. Helped how? Vivian's voice rose dangerously. With what? Your husband's government has no jurisdiction in the countries where my handlers operate. Your influence extends to charity galas and ribbon cuttings, not international criminal organizations. Helena felt her anger warring with unwanted sympathy. So instead you chose to betray everything I trusted you with. I chose to keep my sister alive, Vivian shot back. And before you judge me too harshly, ask yourself what you would do if it were your children's lives at stake. The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Helena knew with terrible certainty that she would move heaven and earth to protect her children, would compromise any principle, betray any trust, sacrifice anything and anyone necessary. The knowledge didn't make Vivian's betrayal forgivable, but it made it comprehensible in a way that left Helena feeling hollow. What happens now? Helena asked finally. Vivian sank back into her chair, looking suddenly exhausted. Now? Now you decide whether to destroy me publicly or quietly. And I pray that when you do, my sister doesn't pay the price for my failure. Your failure? This conversation, Helena, the fact that you discovered the surveillance, that you're confronting me directly instead of simply having me arrested, it proves I became too emotionally involved. In my line of work, that's considered a fatal flaw. Helena studied the woman who had been her closest confidant, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The careful posture, the watchful eyes, the way she never quite fully relaxed even in private moments. It had all been there, hidden in plain sight. What information have you passed along? Helena asked. Everything, Vivian admitted. Your private conversations, your relationship dynamics with the king, your concerns about the succession, your health worries, your children's personal struggles, all of it has been analyzed, cataloged, and prepared for strategic deployment. Helena felt sick. Strategic deployment? For what purpose? To destabilize the monarchy at the moment when it would cause maximum damage. A coordinated release of embarrassing private information, evidence of family dysfunction, proof that even the royals can't maintain the moral standards they preach to their subjects. When?
Soon.
The operation was accelerated after intelligence indicated that other royal families were beginning to implement countermeasures, You weren't the only target, Helena. This is happening across Europe. Helena absorbed this information with the growing realization that her personal betrayal was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of destruction. Who's behind it? Vivian shook her head. I was never told the full scope. Compartmentalized information, need-to-know basis. I know my handlers, I know my specific objectives, but the overall architecture of the operation, she trailed off, looking genuinely frightened for the first time since her facade had crumbled. You realize I can't let you leave this room as if this conversation never happened, Helena said. I know. Vivian's voice was barely audible. I've known for months that this day would come eventually. I hoped I could find a way to protect both you and my sister. Naive, perhaps, but hope is all I had left. Helena stood and walked back to her desk, her mind racing through possibilities. She could have Vivian arrested, expose the surveillance network, and deal with the political fallout. She could quietly arrange Vivian's departure and try to limit the damage through diplomatic channels. Or she could try something far more dangerous, turning Vivian into a double agent and using her to feed false information back to her handlers while working to rescue her sister. Each option carried enormous risks, but as Helena looked at the woman who had betrayed her trust so completely, yet whose motivations she now understood too well, she realized that the choice would define not just their immediate futures, but the kind of person she wanted to be in a world where moral clarity was a luxury few could afford. Vivienne, Helena said finally, we need to discuss what happens next. But first I need to know, is there any part of our friendship that was real? Vivian met her eyes, and for a moment the practice spy disappeared entirely, leaving only a frightened, guilt-ridden young woman. All of it, she whispered. Everything except the reason I was there in the first place. And that's what makes this so much worse. Helena spent that afternoon in her private study, windows drawn against the autumn light, surrounded by classified briefings that painted a picture far more sinister than personal betrayal. Marcus Vale had arrived within hours of her call, bringing with him intelligence files that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Operation Crownfall, as it was designated in intercepted communications, wasn't just targeting individual royals. It was a coordinated assault designed to topple the entire institution of European monarchy. The timing isn't coincidental, Marcus explained, spreading photographs and documents across Helena's mahogany desk. At 60, he retained the sharp-eyed intensity that had made him one of Britain's most effective intelligence officers. His silver hair and lined face spoke of decades spent in the shadows, protecting secrets that could reshape governments. They're exploiting the current political climate, he continued. Rising populism, economic uncertainty, growing resentment of inherited privilege. A few well-timed scandals could provide the spark needed to ignite Republican movements across the continent. Belina studied a photograph of Vivian taken years before her arrival at the palace, standing beside a man whose face was partially obscured by shadows. How long have you known about Vivian's true identity? We've had suspicions for 18 months, Marcus admitted. But we couldn't move without concrete evidence, and we needed to understand the full network. Your discovery of the surveillance equipment gave us the opening we needed. You've been watching me being betrayed for 18 months? Helena's voice carried an edge of cold fury. We've been protecting you, Marcus corrected gently. Every piece of information Vivian transmitted was monitored. We've been feeding carefully curated intelligence back through the network, ensuring that what they think they know about you is largely fiction. Elena felt a complex mixture of relief and violation. So the private moments, the personal conversations she recorded, were either benign or deliberately staged, once we suspected her true purpose. The real damage has been limited, though the psychological impact, Marcus's voice softened with something approaching sympathy. The psychological impact, Helena repeated, thinking of the friendship she'd mourned the night before. Yes, that's been considerable. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Margaret entered, her expression grave. Ma'am, Lady Vivian is requesting an immediate audience. She says it's urgent. Helena exchanged a look with Marcus, who nodded slightly. Send her in, Margaret, and please ensure we're not disturbed. Vivian entered the study looking haggard, her usually perfect composure replaced by barely controlled desperation. She stopped short when she saw Marcus, recognition flashing in her eyes. Agent Vale, she said, her voice flat with resignation. I should have known. Ms. Carmichael, Marcus replied evenly, or should I say, Agent Kozlova. Helena felt another piece of her understanding shift. Kozlova? Yelena Kozlova, Marcus supplied. Born in Prague, recruited by foreign intelligence at 19, specialized in long-term infiltration operations. Vivian Carmichael exists only on paper, a carefully constructed identity with a flawless background that took years to establish. Yelena sank into a chair uninvited, looking suddenly fragile despite the revelations about her true identity. My name is Yelena, she admitted to Helena. Everything else I told you about my background, my education, my diplomatic service, all fabricated, except for my sister. Katya is real, and she's really in danger. Why are you here? Helena asked, struggling to reconcile the woman she'd trusted with this revelation of calculated deception. Because something's changed, Yelena said urgently. I received new orders this morning. The timeline has been accelerated dramatically. They want to move to the final phase within days, not weeks. Marcus leaned forward. What triggered the acceleration? You did, Yelena replied, looking directly at him. Your people have been too active, asking too many questions. My handlers suspect the intelligence community is on to Operation Crownfall. They've decided to execute the plan before you can implement countermeasures. Helena felt a chill of dread. What exactly is the final phase? Yelena hesitated, then seemed to make a decision that visibly cost her. Simultaneous release of compromising information about royal families across Europe, timed to coincide with a coordinated media campaign questioning the legitimacy of inherited power. But that's just the opening move. What's the endgame? Marcus demanded. Manufactured crises designed to test each monarchy's crisis management capabilities. Staged protests, financial market manipulation, even, Yelena paused, looking sick. Even orchestrated threats against specific royal family members to gauge public reaction to potential tragedy. Helena stood so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor. Threats against family members? Not actual violence, Yelena said quickly. At least that's what I was told. The idea is to create scenarios where the public sees royalty as either helplessly privileged or dangerously out of touch. Win-win from their perspective. Marcus's expression had turned grimmer than Helena had ever seen it. Yelena, you realize what you're describing is an act of war against allied governments. I realize I'm describing the systematic destruction of institutions that millions of people depend on for stability and continuity, Yelena replied. Whatever my personal feelings about monarchy as a concept, I've spent 5 years watching what it means to real people. Helena's charitable work alone affects hundreds of thousands of lives. Helena studied the woman whose real name she'd learned only minutes before. Why are you telling us this? If your sister's life depends on your cooperation, because I received other information this morning, Yelena interrupted. Katya is dead. Has been for 2 years. They've been sending me photographs of a girl who looks similar, keeping me operational through a lie. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Helena felt her heart break for this woman who had betrayed her, understanding now the complete manipulation that had driven every choice, every compromise, every sleepless night of guilt. How do you know? Marcus asked gently. Yelena pulled out her phone, showing them a news article in Czech. A traffic accident in Prague 3 years ago. I finally had someone do an independent search when the latest photograph seemed wrong somehow. She was killed 6 months before I was assigned to infiltrate the palace. Helena moved to the window, needing distance from the raw pain in Yelena's voice. Outside, gardeners were preparing the rose beds for winter, their movements methodical and peaceful. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal against the backdrop of international conspiracy and personal devastation. So now you have nothing left to lose, Helena said without turning around. Nothing except my own conscience, Yelena agreed. And the realization that I've been grieving my sister while unknowingly serving the people who killed her. Marcus began gathering his files. This changes our operational parameters significantly. If they're moving to endgame scenarios, we need to coordinate with allied intelligence services immediately. Wait, Helena said, turning back to face them. An idea was forming, dangerous and unprecedented, but potentially their best chance of turning the tables on the conspirators. What if we don't just defend against their operation? What if we turn it against them? Both Marcus and Yelena looked at her with surprise. Helena, Marcus said carefully, whatever you're thinking, remember that you're not a trained operative. The risks of doing nothing are greater, Helena interrupted. They expect us to react defensively, to scramble to protect our reputations and institutions. What if instead we gave them exactly what they think they want? Yelena's eyes widened with understanding. You want to feed them false information, make them think their operation is succeeding while actually controlling the narrative. More than that, Helena said, her voice gaining strength as the plan crystallized. I want to use their own network against them. Yelena, you said they compartmentalize information. What if we created our own compartments, fed different false intelligence to different nodes in their network, and used the contradictions to identify the full scope of their operation? Marcus was shaking his head. Helena, the personal cost to you would be enormous. You'd have to allow genuinely damaging stories about the royal family to circulate, at least initially. Your reputation, your marriage, your relationship with your children would survive if the alternative is the complete destruction of constitutional monarchy in Europe, Helena finished. Marcus, you've spent your career protecting institutions. I've spent mine serving one. Neither of us has the luxury of putting personal considerations first. Yelena leaned forward. It could work, but the operational complexity would be staggering. We'd need to maintain my cover while fundamentally altering my intelligence product. My handlers would need to believe I'm still their asset, while I'm actually feeding them manipulated information. Can you do it? Helena asked. Technically, yes. Psychologically? Yelena paused, considering. After learning about Katya, after understanding how completely I've been manipulated, I'm motivated in ways that frankly surprise me. Helena looked between Marcus and Yelena, seeing in their faces the same mix of determination and trepidation she felt herself. Then we're agreed. We turn their operation into our operation, and we use their own conspiracy to destroy them. Marcus stood, his expression resigned but resolute. I'll need to brief the Prime Minister and coordinate with allied services. This kind of operation requires approval at the highest levels. And I'll need to tell Edward, Helena added, dreading that conversation but knowing it was inevitable. What about me? Yelena asked. Assuming I don't end up in prison for the next several decades, what's my role in this? Helena studied her for a long moment, seeing not the confident advisor who had manipulated her trust, but a young woman whose life had been shaped by forces beyond her control, who had made terrible choices for understandable reasons, and who is now offering to risk everything to make amends. Your role, Helena said finally, is to help us save the monarchy by convincing your handlers that you're helping them destroy it. Think you can handle that level of deception? For the first time since her mask had slipped, Yelena smiled. A real smile, free of calculation or hidden agenda. Your Majesty, after 5 years of living a lie, playing myself might be the most honest thing I've ever done. As evening settled over the palace, Helena stood alone in her study, surrounded by the debris of her shattered assumptions about trust, loyalty, and the price of power. Tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous performance of her life, playing a queen under siege, while actually orchestrating her own salvation. The irony wasn't lost on her that in order to save the institution of monarchy, she would have to become something she'd never wanted to be, a spy master in her own palace, turning betrayal into a weapon and secrets into shields. But as she looked out at the lights of London beyond the palace walls, she thought of the millions of people whose lives would be affected by the outcome of the next few weeks. Their faith in stability, their trust in continuity, their belief that some institutions could weather any storm, all of it rested on her willingness to sacrifice her own peace of mind for a larger purpose. She picked up her phone to call Edward, knowing that the conversation ahead would test their marriage in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But first, she allowed herself one moment of genuine grief for the friendship she'd lost, even as she prepared to forge an alliance that might be the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. The next 3 weeks transformed Helena into someone she barely recognized. Each morning she woke before dawn to review overnight intelligence reports, learning to think like a spy master while maintaining the facade of a grieving queen consort whose private world was slowly crumbling. The performance required her to be simultaneously vulnerable and calculating, innocent and cunning, a victim and a predator. Edward had taken the news about Yelena's true identity with the kind of controlled fury that comes from years of political disappointment. Their conversation had stretched deep into the night, voices raised and emotions raw as they grappled with the implications not just for their security, but for their marriage itself. How could you not know? Edward had demanded, pacing their private sitting room like a caged animal. 5 years, Helena. 5 years of this woman in our home, at our dinner table, privy to conversations that could bring down the government, and you never suspected. Because I'm not a spy, Edward, Helena had replied, her own anger flaring. I'm a woman who thought she'd found a genuine friendship in a world where genuine friendship is rarer than loyalty. Forgive me for being human instead of a walking lie detector. The accusation had hung between them for days, creating a distance that their enemies would have celebrated had they known about it. But gradually, as Edward saw Helena throwing herself into the counter-operation with fierce determination, his anger had transformed into admiration tinged with worry. You're becoming someone I don't recognize, he'd told her one morning, watching her review psychological profiles of Yelena's known handlers. I'm becoming someone capable of protecting what we've built, Helena had replied, though privately she wondered if the woman she was becoming was someone she could live with once this was over. The operational parameters of their deception were intricate beyond anything Helena had imagined. Yelena, now operating as a triple agent, continued her regular communications with her handlers while passing everything through Marcus's team for analysis and manipulation. The intelligence she transmitted was a carefully crafted mixture of truth and fiction, designed to feed the conspirators' confirmation bias while leading them toward actions that would expose their broader network. Helena's role was perhaps the most psychologically demanding. She had to genuinely experience the emotions that Yelena would report: doubt about her marriage, anxiety about her public image, fear about her children's futures, while knowing that each private moment of vulnerability was being recorded and transmitted to people who wanted to destroy everything she represented. The key, Marcus had explained during one of their clandestine briefings, is that your emotional responses have to be authentic enough to pass psychological analysis. Yelena's handlers will be looking for signs that she's been compromised, which means every conversation, every reaction, every moment of private distress has to feel completely genuine. It was a masterclass in method acting applied to international espionage, and Helena threw herself into the role with an intensity that frightened her. She allowed herself to truly feel the betrayal, the uncertainty, the creeping paranoia that came from knowing enemies were watching her every move. The line between performance and reality blurred until she wasn't sure where Helena the Queen ended and Helena the intelligence asset began. The first major test came when Yelena's handlers demanded proof that Helena was beginning to crack under pressure. They wanted evidence of marital discord, signs that the royal family was fragmenting under the weight of hidden scandals. Helena and Edward staged a series of increasingly heated arguments in locations where they knew surveillance equipment would capture every word. "You care more about your public image than your own family," Helena had screamed during one particularly convincing performance, hurling a crystal paperweight that shattered against the wall inches from Edward's head. "And you care more about playing the victim than taking responsibility for your poor judgment?" Edward had roared back, his face red with manufactured fury. Later, alone in their bedroom, they had held each other and whispered apologies, knowing that their enemies would interpret their reconciliation as weakness rather than strength. The emotional whiplash of performing hatred for someone she loved was taking a toll Helena hadn't anticipated. But the performance was working. Intelligence intercepts revealed that Yelena's handlers were pleased with the deteriorating situation at the palace, interpreting the staged conflicts as evidence that their long-term strategy was bearing fruit. They authorized Yelena to increase her surveillance activities and begin probing for information about other European royal families, exactly the escalation Marcus's team needed to map the broader network. Yelena herself was proving surprisingly effective at the double deception required by her role. During their daily briefings, she would report to Helena about conversations with her handlers that painted a picture of mounting excitement among the conspirators. "They're convinced you're on the verge of a complete breakdown," Yelena reported during one of their encrypted communications. "My handler specifically asked me to document any signs of substance abuse or extramarital affairs. They want to push you toward actions that would make the eventual scandal even more destructive." "How are you handling the psychological pressure?" Helena asked, studying Yelena's face for signs of strain. The young woman had lost weight over the past weeks, and there were shadows under her eyes that no amount of makeup could conceal. "By remembering my sister," Yelena replied simply. "Every lie I tell them, every piece of false information I pass along, every day I help you instead of them. It's justice for Katya, even if it comes 3 years too late."
The breakthrough came during the 4th week of their operation.
Marcus burst into Helena's study during what was supposed to be a routine morning briefing, his usually controlled demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. "We've got them," he announced, spreading a series of photographs across Helena's desk. "The financial transfers, the coordination meetings, the full command structure." Yelena's false reports triggered a series of communications between cells that exposed the entire European network. Helena studied the photographs, seeing faces that would have meant nothing to her a month ago, but now represented the architects of her personal nightmare. "How extensive is it?" "Broader than we imagined," Marcus admitted. "Active operations against the royal families of Britain, Sweden, Netherlands, Belgium, and Spain. Preliminary intelligence gathering on Denmark and Norway. This isn't just about destabilizing individual monarchies. It's about fundamentally altering the political landscape of Europe." "Who's funding it?" Marcus hesitated. "A combination of sources. Some legitimate political organizations that don't realize they're being manipulated, some criminal enterprises looking to profit from the chaos, and some foreign intelligence services that see weakened European institutions as advantageous to their geopolitical goals." "When do we move against them?" "Coordinated arrests begin tomorrow night," Marcus replied. "Simultaneous operations across 5 countries timed to prevent any of the cells from warning the others. It will be the largest counterintelligence operation in European history, and Yelena will be publicly arrested with the others, tried and convicted. Her cooperation will remain classified, but she'll serve a reduced sentence in a facility where her safety can be guaranteed. Helena nodded, knowing this was the only way to protect Yelena's cover and ensure that other intelligence networks didn't realize how completely their operation had been compromised. Still, the thought of watching someone who had become, in her twisted way, a genuine ally disappear into the prison system left her feeling hollow. That evening, as Helena prepared for what would be her last secret briefing with Yelena, she reflected on how the experience had changed her understanding of loyalty, betrayal, and the complex motivations that drive people to impossible choices. Yelena had betrayed her trust in the service of a lie, but had then betrayed her handlers in the service of a truth that was far more complex than either of them had initially understood. "Do you regret it?" Helena asked as their final meeting drew to a close. "Not the betrayal, but everything that followed. The choice to help us." Yelena considered the question carefully. "I regret that it took me so long to understand who the real enemy was. I regret that my sister died believing I was serving something worthy instead of being manipulated by the people who killed her. But helping you these past weeks, it's the first time since I was 19 years old that I've made choices based on my own moral compass instead of someone else's agenda." "What will you do when this is over? After prison? After you're free?" "I don't know," Yelena admitted. "I've been Vivian Carmichael longer than I was ever truly Yelena Kozlova. I'm not sure who I am when I'm not playing a role for someone else's benefit." Elena reached across the small table between them and took Yelena's hand, the first genuine physical contact they'd shared since the truth had been revealed. "You'll figure it out. And when you do, if you ever need anything, a reference, a fresh start, someone who understands what it means to rebuild your identity from the ground up, you know where to find me." Yelena's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "Your Majesty, after everything I've done, you saved the monarchy," Helena interrupted. "Not just the British monarchy, but the entire institution across Europe. History won't record your name or your sacrifice, but I'll never forget either." As Yelena left the palace for the last time as a free woman, Helena stood at her window watching her walk across the courtyard toward a future that was uncertain, but finally, genuinely her own. Tomorrow, the arrest would begin, the conspirators would be exposed, and the immediate threat would be neutralized. But Helena knew that the larger questions raised by the experience, about trust and power, about the price of institutional stability, about the moral compromises required to preserve imperfect but necessary systems, would stay with her for the rest of her life. She had saved the crown by learning to think like those who would destroy it, had protected her marriage by allowing it to appear broken, had preserved her integrity by becoming someone she'd never wanted to be. The paradoxes would have been laughable if they hadn't been so painfully real. 6 months after the arrests that dismantled Operation Crownfall, Helena stood in the same study where her world had first shattered, reading the final intelligence report on the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed European monarchy. The autumn light streaming through her windows was softer now, gentler somehow, as if the world itself had exhaled after holding its breath through months of carefully orchestrated deception. The official story, crafted by coordinated intelligence services across 5 countries, described a sophisticated criminal network that had infiltrated multiple royal households for financial gain. The public had been told that several staff members across various palaces had been selling private information to tabloid journalists. It was scandalous enough to satisfy the media's appetite for royal drama while concealing the true scope of the threat that had been neutralized. Yelena, still known to the world as Vivian Carmichael, had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for espionage and treason. The sentence was real, though her incarceration was in a facility that provided both security and opportunities for rehabilitation that reflected her cooperation. Helena received monthly reports on her condition through channels so classified that even Edward didn't know about them. The personal cost of their victory had been significant. Helena's marriage to Edward, while ultimately strengthened by the crisis they'd weathered together, bore scars that would never fully heal. The staged arguments and manufactured conflicts had forced them to voice doubts and resentments they might never have acknowledged otherwise. Working through those genuine issues, distinguishing between performed emotions and real ones, had required months of careful conversation and professional counseling. "You saved us," Edward had told her during one of their late-night talks. "But you also changed us. We can never go back to the innocence we had before this happened." Helena had accepted this truth with the same grace she'd learned to apply to all the casualties of their covert war. Innocence, she'd discovered, was a luxury that leaders couldn't afford when the stakes were measured in the stability of nations. Their children had weathered the public scandal better than expected, though Helena suspected they sensed undercurrents in the official narrative that they were too wise to probe. Her stepchildren, in particular, had rallied around her with a loyalty that touched her deeply, having seen how the crisis had tested their father and stepmother's commitment to each other and to the institution they served. The broader intelligence community had declared the operation a complete success. The network's exposure had led to arrests across multiple countries, revealed foreign interference operations that extended far beyond royal families, and provided intelligence that would protect European democratic institutions for years to come. Helena had been quietly briefed that her role in the operation was being studied as a template for how civilian leaders could support intelligence activities without compromising either their official positions or their personal integrity. Still, there were nights when Helena lay awake wondering if they'd won a battle while losing something essential about who they were as people and as an institution. The monarchy had survived, but its survival had required a level of calculated deception that felt antithetical to the transparency and moral authority that constituted its modern legitimacy. Marcus Vale, now officially retired but unofficially serving as an advisor on royal security matters, had become a regular fixture in Helena's life. His presence was both comforting and troubling, a reminder of capabilities she'd discovered in herself that she'd never wanted to possess. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Helena asked him during one of their monthly security briefings, the question that had haunted her through 6 months of apparent triumph. "We did the necessary thing," Marcus replied, his weathered face reflecting his own complicated relationship with their success. "Whether it was right depends on how you weigh the competing moral claims of institutional preservation versus personal integrity, collective security versus individual honesty. That's not an answer. Because there isn't a clean answer," Marcus said gently. "You were placed in an impossible situation and found an imperfect solution that protected millions of people while compromising your own peace of mind. History will judge whether the trade-off was worthwhile." Helena had been reading philosophy in her spare time, trying to understand the ethical frameworks that might justify or condemn their choices. The classical texts on just war theory, the modern writings on intelligence ethics, the ancient discussions of noble lies told by leaders to protect their people. None provided the clear guidance she craved. What she'd found instead was a more complex understanding of leadership itself. The crown she wore had always been heavy with the weight of tradition and expectation, but now she understood that its true burden was the requirement to make choices that preserved the institution, even when those choices extracted a personal price that could never be fully calculated. The knock on her study door interrupted her brooding. Margaret entered, carrying a sealed envelope marked with the distinctive red wax that indicated communications from the intelligence services. "A report from Mr. Vale, Your Majesty," Margaret said, her tone carefully neutral. Over the months, Helena's longtime secretary had demonstrated the discretion and adaptability that had made her invaluable, asking no questions about the enhanced security protocols and irregular meetings that had become part of palace life. Helena opened the envelope, expecting routine updates on ongoing investigations or international intelligence sharing. Instead, she found a single sheet of paper with a brief message in Marcus's precise handwriting. "Yelena Kozlova was found dead in her cell this morning. Apparent suicide. Preliminary investigation suggests outside influence. Please advise on memorial preferences." The paper slipped from Helena's fingers, floating to the floor like a white flag of surrender. The words seemed impossible, their implications too vast and terrible to process. Yelena was supposed to be safe, protected in a facility where her cooperation was valued and her security guaranteed. The idea that she had taken her own life, or worse, that she had been murdered by associates of the conspiracy they'd thought they'd destroyed, shattered Helena's confidence in everything they'd accomplished. She picked up her secure phone and dialed Marcus's direct line, her hands shaking with a combination of grief and rage she hadn't experienced since the night she'd first learned of Yelena's betrayal. "Marcus, what happened?" "We're still investigating." His voice was heavy with shared grief. She left a note apologizing for the deception and expressing hope that her sacrifice had been worthwhile. "But the timing, the circumstances, there are indicators that suggest external pressure." "What kind of pressure?" "The kind that suggests our victory wasn't as complete as we believed. Yelena may have been eliminated to prevent her from revealing information about aspects of the network we haven't yet discovered." Helena sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the realization that their triumph had been partial, their security illusory, and their sacrifice incomplete. "Are we still in danger?" "Unknown. But Helena, you need to understand, Yelena's death changes the operational parameters significantly. If there are still active elements of the conspiracy, they now know that their network was compromised by someone with inside access to royal security. They'll be looking for revenge, and they'll be looking for it against the people who orchestrated their exposure. The implications crashed over Helena like a cold wave. They had won a battle by sacrificing Yelena's freedom, and now they might lose the war because her death revealed that the enemy was still capable of striking at the heart of their supposedly secure operation. What do we do now? Now we prepare for the possibility that Operation Crownfall was just the beginning, not the end. And Helena, I'm sorry. About Yelena, about the incomplete intelligence, about the fact that your sacrifice may have been for a victory that's less permanent than we hoped. After ending the call, Helena sat alone in her study as evening shadows lengthened across the floor. The woman she'd mourned as a traitor, learned to work with as an ally, and ultimately respected as someone seeking redemption from an impossible situation, was gone. The friendship that had begun as manipulation and evolved into something genuinely complex and meaningful existed now only in Helena's memory and in the classified files that recorded their collaboration. Outside her window, the palace gardens were preparing for winter, the rose bushes carefully pruned and protected against the coming cold. The sight reminded Helena of her conversation with Yelena about the cyclical nature of growth and renewal, about the way beautiful things could emerge from periods of apparent dormancy and death. She opened her desk drawer and withdrew a sheet of personal stationery, beginning to write a letter that would never be sent but needed to be written. Dear Yelena, I don't know if you chose to leave or were forced to go, but I know that your final months were spent in service to something larger than the lies that had defined your earlier life. You helped save institutions that millions of people depend on for stability and continuity. You protected democratic values, even though democracy had failed to protect you. You chose truth even when truth cost you everything, including your life. I will remember not the woman who betrayed my trust, but the woman who earned my respect. Not the spy who deceived me, but the ally who helped me become someone capable of protecting what matters. Not the enemy who threatened my peace, but the friend who taught me that peace without justice is just another form of tyranny. Your sister Katya would be proud of who you became in the end. I am proud to have known you, worked with you, and learned from you. Rest in peace, knowing that the monarchy you helped save will honor your memory in ways the world will never know. Helena signed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in her personal safe alongside the other documents that recorded the hidden history of her reign. Tomorrow she would meet with Marcus and Edward to plan their response to this new threat, to prepare for the possibility that their enemies were more resilient and more dangerous than they had imagined. But tonight, she would mourn a complicated friendship with a woman whose real name she'd learned too late, whose real motives she'd understood too briefly, and whose real sacrifice had been greater than anyone would ever know. The crown she wore felt heavier than ever, weighted now not just with the responsibilities of leadership, but with the knowledge that every victory in the shadow war of intelligence and counterintelligence was paid for with pieces of human dignity and connection that could never be replaced. As the clock struck midnight, the hour when Yelena's transmissions had once carried palace secrets to foreign handlers, Helena allowed herself one moment of pure grief for a friendship that had begun in deception but ended in a truth too complex for easy judgment. Then she straightened her shoulders, locked away her emotions, and prepared to continue the fight for institutions that were worth protecting, even when protecting them required becoming someone she'd never wanted to be. The game of shadows continued, but Helena no longer played it as an amateur. Yelena's final gift had been to teach her that in the world of international conspiracy and counterintelligence, victory was measured not in moments of triumph, but in the willingness to continue fighting long after the cost had become almost unbearable. Outside London sparkled in the darkness, millions of lights representing millions of lives that depended on the stability her institution provided. For them, and for the memory of a woman who had died protecting secrets that protected democracy itself, Helena would continue to pay whatever price leadership demanded. The midnight hour passed, and the shadows settled deeper around Avalon Palace, carrying with them the whispers of secrets that would never be fully told, and sacrifices that would never be completely understood. But in the heart of that darkness, one woman sat straighter, thought clearer, and prepared to face whatever dawn would bring, with the hard-won wisdom that some battles are worth fighting, even when victory tastes like ash and triumph feels like defeat. The crown endured, as it always had, carried by people who understood that its true weight was not gold and jewels, but the accumulated moral complexity of choices made in service to something larger than themselves. And Helena Ashford, queen consort of a kingdom she'd learned to protect through deception, manipulation, and the terrible mathematics of necessary betrayal, settled into her role as a guardian of secrets and a keeper of faith, with institutions that were imperfect but irreplaceable. In the end, that was what monarchy meant in the modern world. Not the divine right of kings, but the human willingness to bear burdens that democracy couldn't distribute, and to make choices that elected officials couldn't politically survive. It was a hard lesson, learned at a price that would never stop accumulating, but it was the lesson that would define her reign and her legacy long after the last classified file was sealed and the final secret was buried with the dignity it deserved.